feeling on this. So, Orla. Thanks, Ruth, and thanks to Rosa for asking me to speak on the impact that this vicious murder has had on the school community. We're seeing so many thousands of people come out across the country in reaction to this vicious murder, and it's not that long since the teaching community lost another member to femicide. Clodagh Ha, we remember you along with Ashling Murphy, but the impact on our school community has been that my male colleagues are disorientated, are lost, are asking, what can we do? But my female colleagues, yesterday, one of my colleagues said to me, I'm so naive. I run by myself, and I haven't been holding my keys in my hand. I never thought of it. My colleagues are terrified, as are women across the country. And what do? We write programs for our students to support them to stay safe, to walk tall. We want to teach them age-appropriate, healthy consent education so that they know to use their voice, to say no when they need to, and they know to hear and understand no when they hear it. When we were begging for the health and safety of our school community and of our pupils to be safe on this reopening, we were told that we had to reopen for the students with special educational needs. Well, I spoke to a mum on Thursday who has 4 boys in our school, 2 of whom are neurodiverse. A mum who has fought for 13 years for adequate resources for her children, every day for 13 years, and when she needs a break, she goes for a run. And for the first time on Thursday, she was scared. When we begged for the health and safety of our classrooms before reopening in this pandemic, we were told that we needed to reopen for those students where their classroom is their safe space. That's not the end of a conversation. Ashling Murphy created a safe space for her students and their innocence has been shattered. We create safe spaces for our students, but it is not enough to say that the classroom is your safe space and there is no other safe space. In a country where more is spent per annum on the greyhound industry than on domestic services for families who need to escape domestic violence, it is not enough for those students. And so we're all standing here together, thousands and thousands and thousands of people across the country. We're standing here for the mothers who have to fight every day and are afraid to run. We're standing here for the teachers who create the safe spaces and are afraid to run. We're standing here most of all for our students, where the classroom is a safe space, but it is not enough that the classroom is the only safe space. And the thousands of people across this nation are raising their voices like the hell of anguish that erupted across South America and then globally to say, this time, Neo and Amenas, not one more. Ashling Murphy went for a run. There was no safe space. Neo and Amenas, not one more. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Elizabeth and has attended a number of rallies and would like to say a few words. So, Elizabeth.
Sorry, so I've been at the Vigil over the last couple of days, and 12 years ago, nearly to the date, I almost ended up like Ashling would have, or Ashling did, and I don't feel like. Can you hear me now? Yeah. So, sorry, my name's Elizabeth, and I've been at Vigil, and rallies over the last couple of days, and I just want to say, from someone who has narrowly avoided the same fate as Ashling 12 years ago, next month, two months away, that it is so important for this not to end, because when I came out of the situation that I was in and the relationship that I was in, I had nowhere to go, including unsupportive guards who were trying their best but didn't know where to send me. Then the hospital system, when they finally realised that there was an internal muscle scar on my neck, not knowing what treatment to give me, and not knowing where to send me, not knowing if physio was going to work, not knowing if counselling was going to work, not knowing if it was psychosomatic, not knowing what impact someone else's hands had on my body. And that's been 12 years, and I'm normally quite jokey about it, but the last week has just been terrifyingly triggering, and also really oddly supportive in the exact same way, because so many men and so many women and so many people from the LGBT community, so many people from my family, so many people from my job, just been trying to reach out. So if you know someone who's like me and has been blessed to survive an attempt or an assault, please reach out to them, because we're really terrible. I don't know what we are right now, but this is huge and this is really important, because in 2010 and 2011 there wasn't this, and if I had have died that day, I don't think anyone would have noticed. So thank you guys so much. Please say a big prayer and just may she rest in peace. Thank you so much.
Well done, sister.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm sure it wasn't easy to say, but it needed to be said. I mean, if there are people who want to speak, if you can come up and approach me, and we obviously don't want it to be too long, but it's absolutely open to people to speak. So our next speaker is Harper, please. Harper.
I just want to echo that was extremely brave and important, Elizabeth. I'm the opposite of Rita. I'm too tall for this. And I'm sure she's unfortunately not the only person in this audience that I'm looking into today that has experienced some close calls or some extreme gender violence. So just reaching out to all of you who are feeling that, because we all are. It's part of why we're here. So, excuse me if I get emotional, but I spent the past few days, as I'm sure many of you did as well, in complete shock after Ashling's murder. Sorry, actually I have the wrong thing open. And it's not, unfortunately, because it's actually a surprise in 2022 to see in your timeline or in your news feed or whatever on your social media another victim of femicide or gender-based violence, but because it's so jarring to be so frequently pulled back into a state of grief. When I was looking at footage online last night of the really, I don't even know what to call it, heartwarming, tragic protest in Tullamore in particular, but obviously, or Vigil, there's been vigils everywhere. And seeing the footage of Ashling's family linking arms and walking along the canal that she should have been safe on, I was reminded of when I first learned a lesson about gender-based violence and its prevalence in the world, also 12 years ago next month. One of my acquaintances was murdered in the exact same way that Ashling was. And when I remember seeing her family walk along the path that she should have been safe on, the path that I had run on by myself so many times before. I was 16 and she was 17. Her name was Chelsea King. Then, as now, I knew nothing separated me from Chelsea or Ashling except for a mere accident of fate. Then, as now, I see myself and my friends and my sister in the face of every new victim of male violence and femicide that floods my social media feeds. Then, as now, I feel extraordinarily haunted by the ordinary details of a life taken too soon. I feel infuriated that 12 years later, a classroom full of primary school students are learning a lesson that they shouldn't have to learn so young, as their teacher doesn't show up for a day of school. 12 years from now, I don't want them to be at a protest like this, 12 years from now, I don't want them to be re-traumatized because they're in an abusive relationship. I want them to live in a better world. And that's why I'm here today, in spite of the grief, and that's why I'm sure all of you are here today as well. There are, however, some crucial and, fortunately for all of us, uplifting differences between my experience of that brutal murder in 2010 and the one today, that we are all here mourning today. When Chelsea was killed when I was 16, one of the first things I was told was that it was her fault. She shouldn't have been running alone, that she made a bad decision that cost her life, and she had to share in the blame. 12 years later, and Ashling's death is recognized as the complete tragedy it is. From a local community football group of old men with bad knees, to a scoliosis page on Facebook my friend follows, to local GAA and running clubs, we all mourn Ashling, who did everything women are told to do to protect themselves, everything we are blamed for not doing when we're attacked, and that still wasn't enough, because nothing will ever be enough in a world that thrives on misogyny and that pushes it down our throats from the moment we become conscious beings. But these attitudes did not shift with the mere changing of the wind. They did not change because of the benevolence of industry moguls or the people in power. The attitudes of ordinary people, the warmth and outrage expressed over the past few years, and the feminist sentiment contained within that grief comes from the frankly heroic feminist protests around the world that for the past decade have proclaimed loud and clear that enough is enough. From the slut walks in Canadian universities in 2011, which was the first time I was exposed to the idea that it wasn't nothing I wore justified my abuse, to the millions that poured onto the streets to denounce Donald Trump, and the millions more that made their outrage heard when George Floyd was taken too soon. To the Latin American feminists who shouted from the rooftops they would not accept one more death, and who have taken to the streets to win bodily autonomy. To the Chilean feminists who pointed the finger at male abusers in their own lives, but also to the institutions which uphold and propagate sexist violence in every aspect of society. To the young Irish women and non-binary people who held Savita in their minds and hearts as they fled into the polls. Because at the end of the day, my hope does not reside in Dáil Éireann or in these boardrooms. It does not reside in the White House, nor on private jets, nor in any of the halls of power. My hope resides with the overworked nurses and immigrant cleaners that have kept us alive these past 2 years. My hope is with the tirelessly laboring garment factory worker and the teacher working in poorly ventilated or overcrowded classrooms. My hope is with the hospitality worker that spends half her wages on rent and suffers the racist landlord. My hope is with all of you who turned out to this protest today. My hope does not lie with these people because what they suffer is correct or should be glamorized, but because each indignity they suffer opens their heart to the suffering of others. In each COVID death, in each single parent in homeless accommodation, in each victim of police brutality, and even in a 23-year-old woman who loved music and decided to go for a run on an Wednesday afternoon. They see a fragment of themselves and all of those who suffered needlessly, and this is what compels them to fight back, and this is what compels us to fight back. So just to end, I did this at a recent speech because unfortunately I've spoken at too many of these sorts of things, but in Brazilian tradition, when they're at protests about femicide and gender violence, they say the victim's name and then they call out presente to remind us why we're here, that they are present in the movement. So I'll say Ashling Murphy and you say presente. Ashling Murphy. Sorry. Ashling Murphy. Ashling Murphy. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Harper, for giving an idea of the international movement that there has been against gender-based violence. If Therese is here, could you maybe just come up? And just before I bring in our next speaker, following on from what Harper said, I'm an activist with a local group in Dublin 15 and 7, and one of the members has compiled a list of all of the women that have been murdered in our area in the last 20 years. So Harper mentioned Presente, and there's an international slogan that's been used throughout Latin America where a woman in Argentina is murdered, so frequently, like every 19 hours. And the slogan is Ni una menos, which means not one less woman to be lost to violence. Now, we've used the slogan not one more today because not one more killing is just more easily understood. But so when I call the names of these women, I'd ask you to shout not one more. And these are just some of the women. Okay, so Marilyn Wren. Sylvia Shields, killed here in Grange Gorman. Mary Cullinan. Miriam O'Donoghue. Bente Carroll. Eugenia Brattis. Michaela Davis. Anna Finnegan. Linda Evans. Rudo Mawere. Amanda Carroll. Jean Eagers, killed last year in my area in Hartstown. Jenny Poole. Fabiole Kamara. Uran Secek Terendorge. And Ashling Murphy. Okay, so thank you. Our next speaker is from the trade union movement, and I really think the trade unions really should be taking initiatives on this issue with so many women members. So Therese Maloney from the executive of Unite the Union, thank you so much for speaking.
Okay, members of Unite throughout Ireland stand in solidarity with the family and friends and colleagues of Ashling Murphy. It is important to say her name and the name of all victims of gender-based violence. Last year alone, 7 women were killed in Ireland. And I'm going to apologise in advance for any mispronunciation of anyone's name. Mary O'Keefe, Sharon Bennett, Urant Serendor, I think you'd said it better, who died of her injuries after being attacked on her way home. Jenny Poole, Eileen O'Sullivan, Fabio Camara de Campos, Zenit Bashab. Ashling Murphy is the first name in this list of 2022. The purpose of us all coming together here in Smithfield and around the country is not only to remember, but to say no more. To say we are not prepared for more names to be added to this list. Many of the tributes to Ashling Murphy have noted that she was a teacher, but there's another word we need to use. She was a worker, and violence against women is a worker's issue. The shift worker afraid to walk home or take public transport at night, perhaps paying money she can ill afford for a taxi, carefully taking down the taxi plate number. The hospitality worker worries that the customer who looks a bit too closely at her in her workplace might follow her home, clutching her keys in her hand, her other hand on her phone. The woman trapped in a domestic violence situation without money to live and afraid of relying on inadequate state support. The low-paid worker who simply cannot take the time off work to leave an abusive situation and find safety for herself and her children. Today we need to focus on Ashling Murphy and offer what comfort we can to those who love her. But in the days and weeks ahead, we need to focus on all the things Who look over their shoulder at the sound of footsteps. Violence against women and girls will only end with the precursor to violence, bare aggression, the remarks, the slut shaming, the everyday sexism become unacceptable. And for that, we need men and boys to be our allies. We need them to shut down conversations that disrespect women. We need them to shut down the suggested remarks. We need them to shut down the inappropriate messaging. We need them to shut down the social media trolling. We need an all-of-society approach, but that also needs to be underpinned by policy. When domestic violence is involved in the domestic violence service, one government department to be tasked with taking violence against women and girls rather than a disjointed approach. We're attacking unnamed Ashling's life. But as we very good suggestions for the way forward. Before we begin the last speaker, I just want to make a couple of announcements. First of all, there's a stall over here where you can leave your name. You can obviously take a leaflet as well. If you would like to be involved in an online assembly or call, phone call obviously will be online. This coming Thursday, being organised by Rosa, to discuss how we can actually bring this demand forward, for an emergency conference to be convened and for real action and progress to happen arising from this, phenomenon that we're seeing in the country now. So I'd ask you to please decide today that you will be an activist on this issue and be part of the change. So you can leave your name here or whatever. And also to add to what Ray said, 11 women were murdered in Northern Ireland during the pandemic. It's actually a record number, never seen before, including women burnt in their cars by their partners, and just widely unreported, unfortunately, down the south, an even higher rate than here. So I think that also should be marked. So our next speaker is Laura Fitzgerald from Rosa and the Socialist Party.
Thanks, Ruth, and thanks to everyone who's here. If you just bear with me for a few minutes, I'll try and sum up some of the points made today about why we're here and what the next steps are. So I think we know why we're here. We're here